Thank you so much, Cindy. I think you left your phone. So we can't be without these. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Trust is essential to the ability to function as an individual. At an extremely fundamental level, we trust that the sun will rise in the morning. We trust that the fundamental laws of physics will be predictable and remain immutable. We believe that the force of gravity will work predictably, that the orbit of the Earth around the sun will continue year in and year out. We trust in nature. We trust that winter snow will give way to the warmth of spring. Thank you very much. We trust that summer's warmth will give way to the crisp chill of autumn and the turning of leaves. Back in the 1970s, as part of an adult education class here in this congregation, where the participants were asked to write a statement of belief, the late Florence Emmons, who was a long time member of this church and beloved by many here, penned the following. It's an affirmation that is known to many of us and one that has been circulated widely in Unitarian Universalist circles. She wrote, "I believe in the orderly processes of the universe which hold the planets in their orbits and control the activities of microscopic cells. I believe in the pervading impartial forces of nature through which destruction is made constructive. I believe in the ever-changing beauty of the natural world, which brings joy and inspiration to many. I believe in the healing and restorative power of nature, without which all things would be in great jeopardy. I believe in the profound lessons which nature teaches, lessons of struggle and adaptability, tenacity and purpose, endurance and growth, patience, balance, and the inevitability of cause and effect. I believe in the hope and faith which nature gives to the observant through predictable, compensatory certainties, light after dark, warmth after cold, peaceful calm after lashing storm, and always the miracle of the sun, the rain, and the seed." This brief essay, which she called "I Believe in Nature," is something we often recited on Sunday mornings as part of worship many years ago. Its essence is simple. So simple, in fact, that we go through our days not even being, as Flo said, observant. And yet we still trust in these things, for without this trust, how would we plan our lives? What would be our sense of time? What would be our sense of place? What would keep us from living in a constant state of uncertainty? That we accept these certainties as true forms the foundation of trust. Imagine if we could not trust in these basics. That the sanguine assurance of little orphan Annie that the sun will come out tomorrow was not assured. That we lived in constant fear that the law of gravity might be repealed, that the air we breathe might suddenly become toxic or disappear into space for lack of gravity. This assurance from Annie, trust in the sunrise, is the very bedrock on which all other forms of trust are constructed. For without these basics, how could we hope to develop higher-level social contracts, the most basic of relationships, the institutions of society, our own judgment? Those of us of a certain age may remember a television game show back in the 1960s. It actually started back in the 50s. It was called To Tell the Truth. And I see lots of nodding, so I'm not the only one of that age. The premise was, in each episode, that they would feature one individual who had done something interesting, discovered something, maybe had done one of those things that people brought up here a few minutes ago, talking about, and it was some work of art, an athletic feat. It could have been any number of things. And then there'd be two other people who would pretend to be that person. And at the beginning of each episode, three contestants, the real person and the two imposters, would stand as the stage lights came up in turn on each one of them. My name is Fred Flaghopper. My name is Fred Flaghopper. My name is Fred Flaghopper. The narrator would then go on to explain who Fred Flaghopper was and what that person had done. The task for the panel, which was, as typical of many of these shows, is made up of a mix of comedians and past their prime celebrities, was to take turns asking questions of the contestants in order to figure out which one was telling the truth. The two imposters were free to make up anything they wanted to, and in fact were trained prior to the show to know as much as possible about the real person. The real person, on the other hand, was sworn to tell the truth. They could not fabricate an answer to any of the panelists' questions. What we could always trust, however, was at the end of each episode when Bud Collyer said, "Would the real Fred Flaghopper please stand?" I see mouths moving. We remember this, right? Would the real Fred Flaghopper please stand up? Each contestant would in turn feign beginning to rise. And then one would. And would go on to provide more details of the truth of the story. In our exercise earlier, we knew that one of the things being told by each person was a fabrication. And yet we also knew that at the end of the game, we'd find out the real story. A very young child first learning hide and seek may actually tell the parent where they're going to hide. You know this? Yes, you know this, right? Because children under the age of 3 or 4 have not developed the ability to create intentional fantasy. And they assume that everybody sees the same reality they do, that there's no place to hide. Peekaboo may sound like a silly game, but for the developing young mind, it's an exercise in reassurance that even when you can't see mommy or daddy for a moment, they're still there. Psychologists have discovered that when children begin to create answers that are not factual, it is to some extent a good thing, because it indicates the beginnings of abstract thinking. The ability to imagine, the ability to be creative. Growing up as the 4th child out of 6, my oldest brother being 14 years my senior, my parents benefited from ample training in the ability to discern fact from fiction. And I quite quickly learned that honesty was its own reward because they had zero tolerance for deceit. Trust is built on reliability and predictability. We trust that the sun will rise tomorrow because that's always been the case. It has a constant in which we are secure even if we have endured 2 solid weeks of cloud and rain. This is true of our experience of the physical world. It is the same in our relationships, and it is the same in society where we live. Those who have known me for a while might find it quite surprising to learn that I was a late adopter of social media. I didn't have a Facebook profile until about 10 years ago, when I was almost forced to. In fact, I once had a rather heated argument with a former member of this congregation who felt personally insulted that I referred to Facebook as the Borg Collective, as if I was personally accusing that individual of being a cyborg. My reluctance was based on the sense that these platforms were a double-edged sword. And while it has helped me keep in better contact with far-flung members of my family and provides a virtual space for collaborating with those I share certain interests with, my early sense that it posed a significant risk of replacing real relationships and blurring the lines between reality and fantasy have been borne out by time and experience in ways that I could not imagine when I first signed on to Facebook in 2015. And it's not just what we think of as social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, the X formerly known as Twitter, TikTok, all of those others. Search engines that we rely on to find information when we are looking for facts are tuned. They use automated intelligence to show us things that will conform to our preferences and show us things that are going to conform to our biases. Why? Because it keeps us coming back and clicking. We, all of us, end up creating our own echo chambers. And most of what we are exposed to conforms and reinforces our existing beliefs and encourages us to discount perspectives that challenge our way of thinking. And when we do encounter contradictory information, it encourages our tendency to dismiss it. We dismiss those things often even if there are seeds, maybe not the entire truth, but there are seeds worth considering. And that tendency is difficult to avoid. The constant 24-hour-a-day instant news cycle has radically changed the way we consume information and how it is presented to us. Newspapers have become a quaint concept, and even traditional radio and television news is largely a thing of the past. The effectiveness of targeted digital advertising has sucked the life out of traditional news sources and the economics that made traditional media possible. Our information landscape has become fragmented. News sources vetted with professional journalistic integrity have given way to our personal information bubbles. We carry supercomputers with unimaginable power in our pockets. I was talking about those a couple minutes ago, right? These supercomputers are connected to an unbelievably vast constellation of information and misinformation and disinformation, which is flooding our consciousness at speeds unimaginable only a few short years ago. By some surveys, almost, see if we can guess the number here, there's a percentage of adults that get some or most of their news from social media. What do you think that percentage is anymore? It's 60%. Is the number. That's the common number that I see. There's, there are some that say more, some that say less. 60%. 60% of adults get some or most of their news from social media, which is largely targeted to conform to that individual's existing worldview. In the last year, the meteoric rise in generative AI, the increasing prevalence of deep fakes, and the difficulty at discerning the truth of what we see with our own eyes is calling the very notion of reality into question. How can we trust if we can't trust what we see with our own eyes? The result is that we have, to a large degree, entered into a post-truth environment in so many ways. Objective reality has become secondary for many to subjective beliefs. The erosion of trust in our institutions, fueled by this fragmentation, has driven us further into polarized tribes. We find it difficult to find common ground on the most basic and mundane of questions. There's a common meme that you've probably seen circulating across social media. It's a picture of a stick. A stick. And the caption is, to prove that people will argue about anything. Oh, yeah. It is becoming increasingly difficult to engage in reasoned debate. The result of this is that the very fabric of our social structure has become torn and fragile. When we no longer share a common understanding of what is true, we lose that ability to trust. In the face of all of this, and especially in the face of the attempt at the systematic dismantling of our democratic institutions and the norms it has enabled, we are faced with a combination of challenges and choices. 2 weeks ago, Reverend Tony spoke about how a battle of culture versus strategy, of how in a battle, rather, of culture versus strategy, culture always ends up winning. Culture, as he put it, eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. One of the stories he related was of the expansion congregation that the Unitarian Universalist Association attempted to create in Texas several years ago. Part of the strategy, as he told us, for those who didn't attend that particular service, part of the strategies he told us was to create small affinity groups, kind of like small group ministry kinds of things. But the idea was that in the paradigm created by the Christian church consultant who came up with this concept, the Christian congregations had used these to foster growth, and the groups were created around areas of common interest for the members of that group. Maybe fishing, maybe hunting, maybe food, maybe whatever. And when they all got together on Sunday, they all got together and they had something in common. They were all Christians. And they all believed in whatever the creed of that particular church was. But they tried this in this Unitarian Universalist Expansion congregation. It didn't work out quite so well because our culture is different. So what they did is they created these groups not around any of those things that I just mentioned. They created groups there was groups of pagans, there were groups of UU Christians, there were groups of humanists, there were groups of all of these various things. And when they got together on Sunday morning, they didn't have anything to agree to talk about. And so the whole experiment fell apart. They just argued about their identities, and ultimately the UUA abandoned the experiment. The attempt to use a strategy that didn't fit into UU culture didn't work. It's not that our culture is bad. It's not that the strategy wasn't a good idea. It's just that the strategy created and amplified bubbles that were focused on defending their own truths rather than working to find a common truth. The casualty in this story was the loss of trust. Casualty was the loss of trust, because trust cannot survive without a common understanding of the truth. Relationships cannot survive without a common understanding of truth. Communities cannot survive without a common understanding of truth. Society cannot and will not survive unless we can return to a place where we have a common understanding of truth and a common understanding of reality. The reality of the culture in society, American society in particular today, is beyond challenging. It is beyond challenging. The forces that I've outlined and the realities of our social and technical and media landscape have created those bubbles that do not share a common understanding of truth. The forces that seek ultimate power and control, the forces that seek to accumulate unfathomable wealth, and the forces that stand in opposition to the loving community of justice we seek to create, are completely aware of the power of these things and are completely willing to harness that to their ends. They have no allegiance to truth and are determined to divide us into as many factions with individual agendas as they can. They seek to divide us into bubbles so devoted to individual visions of reality that truth no longer matters. They seek to gaslight us with distractions, with lies so outrageous and so antithetical to everything we hold dear and everything that we are, that we cannot help but to lose our focus and react, sometimes abandoning our own truth along the way. Fighting fire with fire only creates devastation and ashes. We need to use a different strategy, one that's in harmony with the reality of today's cultural environment, one that honors our values and called us back to a shared vision. Rebuilding trust requires creating spaces for open and honest dialogue. This is something that Patrick has shared with us on many, many Sundays, where individuals can engage with differing viewpoints without fear or judgment. This means practicing active listening, seeking to understand rather than to persuade, and valuing empathy over argument. Does anybody here actually believe that the last election was a mandate to tear down the social safety net? Does anybody here actually believe that the majority of Americans, even those who supported the current regime, believe that the solution to our problems can be achieved by taking apart the institutions of government that promote science, fight disease, promote inclusion, provide transparency, ensure that education is available to everyone, that corporations and their wealthy billionaire owners are not allowed to take advantage of desperate individuals and families? Does anybody here actually believe that the majority of those in this country think that making America great means withdrawing from the world community? Does anybody here believe that the majority of Americans are not becoming horrified that the United States of America is being added to lists of countries that are dangerous to visit? Because if you say the wrong thing, you might just find yourself in a foreign prison with no way out. I don't believe any of that. I don't believe that the majority of Americans believe any of that. And that gives me hope. I'm not a Pollyanna, and I'm not suggesting that we're out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. The forces aligned against justice, against equity, and against truth are powerful, and they are determined. But we are powerful too. I sense that the tide is turning. I sense a hunger for the end to the chaos. And in that, I sense an opportunity to rebuild trust. Rebuilding trust requires creating spaces for open and honest dialogue where individuals can engage with differing viewpoints, as I said before, without fear of judgment. This means practicing active listening, listening to understand rather than persuade, and valuing empathy over argument. That does not mean accepting falsehood or abandoning our values. It means meeting people who actually share our values where they are. The farmer in Iowa, the steel worker in Pennsylvania, the unemployed coal miner in West Virginia, your neighbor who is struggling to put food on the table when the cost of everything is going up while their income remains stagnant, are not opposed to our values. But they may not understand we care about them because, frankly, we haven't been real good at getting that message across. And I'm not just talking about us here in this room. I think in general, we haven't been really good at getting that message across. Achieving our goals requires we figure out how to create communities where constructive disagreement is seen as an opportunity for growth rather than as a threat. This involves fostering a culture of respect where individuals are willing to engage with those who hold different viewpoints, even when it's uncomfortable. It was something Cindy said when she was up here a few minutes ago about daring, about the risk, when she asked the question, what's the risk of telling the truth? It's the risk of telling the truth. Trust is built on relationships, and the only way to restore the social fabric is to restore the relationships that have been abandoned that have been broken by the mass abandonment of truth. We must recognize and insist that objective reality exists, and we must recognize and insist that objective reality matters. This means valuing facts, evidence, and reason, and rejecting the notion that alternative facts are equally valid, but doing so in a way that invites those who have decided to accept the attractive illusions because they're different from the harsh reality can trust once again. This is not an easy process, but there is, in my mind, no other way. The path to building a future we can all strive for is long. Much of it is not paved, And some of it will require that we blaze new trails through uncharted and unfamiliar territory. The path leads through uncomfortable conversations and the extremely difficult practice of listening and really hearing what others are saying, not surrendering our values or our principles, but fostering new relationships and rebuilt relationships based on truth and a new fabric of trust. May it be so.